Okay, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. This is the Vermont House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. It is Tuesday, June 24th at 1:14 in the afternoon. We're back from the floor and from offices and from lunch to continue our discussions on the Budget Adjustment Act and the pieces that the Appropriations Committee has asked us to take a look at and weigh in on. So right now, this afternoon, we have Commissioner June Tierney from the Department of Public Service and also Christine Hallquist from the Vermont Community Broadband Office. We're talking about Section 1, subsection 28, which is the $30 million to the Public Service Department to be used as a state match. We don't get a chance very often anymore to hear anything about broadband, although it does have a lot to do with commerce in the state and the workforce as well. So I think it'll be interesting for the committee to hear what's happening and kind of give us an idea of what that $30 million will do for the state. But Commissioner, I'll turn it over to you, I guess.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, it's a pleasure to be with this committee and to make new friends who may not be known to me by name right now, but I'm sure we'll get to know each other over time. And for old friends, it's good to see you.
Well, it may be a good idea for the committee to introduce themselves to you and to Christine before we continue on. So,
if you like, Mr. Chair, that'd be great.
Good afternoon, Representative from Jared Samus, Representative from Castleton.
Hi, Edie Granning, Jericho Underhill.
Jonathan Williams, Berry City.
Monique Priestley, Bradford Fairleigh, West Fairleigh.
Logan Nicole, Ludlow, Mount Holly, and Shrewsbury, ranking member.
And Mike Marcotte from Coventry, chair of the committee.
Good afternoon, Stephanie Jerome from Brandon, and I'm the vice chair.
You don't need Jim, but Emma Mulvaney Stanek, state rep from Burlington.
Kirk White from Bethel, Rochester, Stockbridge, and Hancock.
Jim Carroll, Bennington.
Heather Chase, Chester, Athens, Grafton, Wyndham.
And I'm Andrew Hegarty. I'm the committee assistant.
Excellent. I am June Tierney. I am the Commissioner of the Department of Public Service for the time being. I have been for the last, I think this is my 7th year now. And by time being, I mean, I serve at the pleasure of the governor. So I also work very hard to have cordial relations with the folks in the legislature because Vermont has sent you here. And I have great respect for the fact that you folks have taken office and taken in stewardship of these vital interests for Vermonters. With me today, as you will learn in greater detail, is Director Christine Hallquist of the Vermont Community Broadband Board. And with us also is her able Deputy Director, Rob Fish. The way to think of the Vermont Community Broadband Board, in my opinion, is as a SWAT team. It's a very specialized team that you folks created about, I think, 2 years ago. They've been in business for about a year, and they're embedded administratively at the Department of Public Service. By law, that means that they have independent decisional powers over how they use the appropriations that you give them in order to implement the state's broadband connectivity policy. Much of this work was done in my department before the pandemic without appreciable amounts of funding. And so, Chair Marcotte, you'll recall those lean days when we were trying to get some connectivity done somehow, sometimes with a little bit of money from the Universal Service Fund, but not a lot, just a lot of recognition that it needed to get done, but very little prospect for getting everybody connected in the state, certainly not with fiber. But fast forward a couple of years with all of the federal funding that's come available, and we now have the Vermont Community Broadband Board, and we have Director Hallquist quarterbacking that effort with a very, very capable board of executives who, for the most part, I think, have experience in the utility industry and are now doing other things, including this public service for the state. What we're asking today is that $30 million be appropriated to help secure a large infrastructure project that is critical for our build out so that the objective that the governor has and that I know you share of improving the prospects and the plight of rural communities in Vermont can be advanced. And in order to do that, we need this backbone middle mile network built in the state, about which Director Hallquist is going to speak. That's what this $30 million is for. And it's needed because the FCC is in the process of deciding whether to support Vermont with an additional, I think, $116 million to build such a project. It would be innovative in the nation and could very well serve as an example for how other states could address their rural connectivity issues. To ease you into the bigger picture of broadband and how it's getting done in Vermont and where this middle mile project fits in, I'm going to ask Christine to speak to that in much greater detail. I'm here as sort of the sidekick to help out if there's any kind of confusion when it comes to that embedded relationship of the SWAT team in my agency. So with that, Mr. Chair, I would give the microphone to Director Hallquist.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Christine Hallquist, the Executive Director of Vermont Community Broadband Board. And I'll just take a little picture of this moment because what June described as providing that support has been very valuable in terms of getting us up to speed quickly. So it's, the team, all other than Rob, the team is new. We've got a board of directors that was two were appointed by the governor, one by the House, one by the Senate, and one from the CUDs. And having June and her team's really good knowledge of state processes and working with the administration has been quite smooth. So I'm going to quickly go through the mission and talk about what we've done, so I can get right to the issue at hand, which is $30 million. I'll describe the mission in three terms. You can see the words on the slide here. But our mission, first of all, is to get every Vermonter connected. And we're well on the way to doing that. And we really think overall we've got the budget to do that. The next step is to make it affordable. And I'll talk about that as part of this presentation. And then the third component, which is the most important, and you described that a bit, was to maximize positive social impact. And that really is about giving our rural communities and our rural community members the opportunity to have equal opportunity as the urban areas do today. And, of course, I'm not going to say that broadband's the magic bullet, because there are lots of other issues. It's really a fabric that the legislature and the governor are working on, including housing. But, today, if we talk about economic development, it's water, sewer, roads, and broadband. Next slide, please. From a public accountability standpoint, this board has been very deliberative and very active. The first meeting was held in August 2021. We've had 43 public meetings, 4 hours each, average attendance, well attended. Meetings and recordings are posted at the website. And, for example, we've, when it comes to approving grants for the communication union districts, we go through a pretty laborious process where the staff reviews it. We have an outside party review it for its technical and financial performance, and then the board reviews it. And at least one of these grants took 4 board meetings to approve, and that's a good thing. Next slide, please. So where we are today, I'm happy to say that we've 5 of our 10 communication union districts are in construction as we speak, connecting homes and businesses. There are 214 member towns that are part of CUDs. We have over 428 volunteers working across the state. Those are volunteers working to get this done. I compared this to the original electric cooperative movement. I had a picture in my office, and I remember looking at that slide about the first pole that was set in Eden Mills, Vermont, thinking how great it would have been to work back then when everybody was working towards a common goal. Well, that's exactly what this is. And we have 76% of the state's population represented, and 93% of locations without access are represented by a CUD. When I say 93% of the locations without access, we are addressing all locations. It's just 93% are represented by a CUD. Next slide. The rest are being addressed through complying with Act 71 through other means. So this is a slide that shows you the towns that are being served by Consolidated Veto, TDS, and Southern Vermont working with Fidium. So if you look at the Northeast Kingdom, for example, there are 57 towns in the Northeast Kingdom, and there's not a lot of interest in serving that territory. So most of that territory is underserved and unserved. But the areas that are in white here, primarily they have service. We're just trying to get to the end of the road, which is why we're working with private telecom carriers. Next slide, please. So if you look at this slide here, the point of this slide is to show you that we have a dashboard on a website where you can get all the details about what's happening with the grants. This is available to the public. It's really meant to be very transparent. You know, we're showing you actually see the number of addresses that are getting addressed, addresses that are getting connected, as well as status of each one of the CUDs. And as of today, we've obligated 124.26 million of the 245 million we have available today. We anticipate getting the rest of that obligated by summer. You can see out of an 8,000 mile build, 7342 mile build, we have 2232 in process, and 15K, about a quarter of the addresses being worked on right now. That means, you know, if you look at, we said we want to get this done in 5 years. This shows you that we're right on schedule. Next slide, please. Oh, yeah. Now, the important thing to make, one point I want to make here is this is about affordability. You know, the rural areas are expensive to serve. That's why they have not been served to this day. So we have a plan. We have a plan to get every address served. The problem right now is with approximately $345 million in funds, it's still relatively expensive. So we're aggressively seeking as many grants as possible to drive that down. Ultimately, if we had 100% of the capital infrastructure covered by grants, we could drive that down to $50. So every 50 million provided grants reduces the customer by about $10 a month. So our goal is to try to get this as covered, 100% of the grant covered, really, because the other piece of this, when I talk about equal access, you know, you're looking at the urban areas with very, you know, quite low cost access to broadband, and we want the rural areas to have that equal opportunity. And then when I get into the next slides, I'll talk about the middle mile. And part of the middle mile is to drive down our data costs so we can be competitive with areas like New York City and Boston. Now, getting into the specific language of the Budget Adjustment Act, we've made some minor changes that the administration supported. But you can see the language that you have in front of here. In the yellow is some language we added after the governor developed the budget. But we really, that $30 million is to be used to leverage federal dollars in programs, including the NTIA Middle Mile Broadband Grant, which we'll talk about in a minute, to reduce the cost of overall access to broadband. This is about using the money to leverage. So this $30 million represents state match towards a $114 million NTI grant that was submitted September 30th. So you're talking about $67 million being leveraged with 30. So that, you know, that when I talk about getting to the point where we can 100% fund this with grant funding, this is a very important grant. And, you know, when this was first introduced back in February of last year, I was at a meeting in Washington, and they talked about $1 billion being available in competitive grants for the states. Federal government was going to offer 10 to 15 grants. At that point, I thought Vermont doesn't have a chance. But in June, we heard from the NTIA that we stand a strong chance because we're the only state in the union that's committed to get every address connected with fiber optic internet. And we're the only state in the union that has CUDs. So we could present a very competitive federal grant. So we got to work on that because we certainly want to leverage as much money as possible. So if you look at this, also complies with this. When I talk about this statewide competitive grant, the statewide design is falls right out of Act 71. The question that's been asked is, you know, can we, you know, should we do a statewide design? You know, our answer last year was yes, we should, but we don't want to hold up the CUDs, and therefore we've done that. Next slide, please. So the middle mile doesn't connect directly. If you look at networks, there's the first mile, which is kind of leaving the major data centers. That's like your transmission lines in the electric industry. Then your middle mile is to, at the state level, I should probably use roads. You've got your interstate, your state roads, and your local highways. Consider these like the state roads for the internet. What you're looking at here is a resilient and redundant statewide design. Fiber is proven to be future-proof in terms of its technology. In the electric utility business, we were using fiber in the 70s. From the 1970s is performing as well as it does today. So, it's really important we make a good upfront investment for what I call a 40-year network. And what you're looking at is what we call redundant rings, geographically redundant rings, so that if you get a break from any one direction, it can be filled in from another direction. And so we've also, part of the statewide design, we have connections in Canada, New York, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire for that redundancy for the state. This is really to address some of the issues you've seen. For example, 911, you've probably heard about some of the 911 failures. That was because of lack of redundancy. So what are some other benefits of the middle mile build out? Talk about it's following good design principles for redundancy and resiliency. But it also is it's also to reduce end cost to the customer. And it reduces the end cost to the customer first by, of course, stretching our ARPA funds. And it reduces borrowing. If we talk about having anything we have to go to the market to finance today faces the same problem we're all facing, which is higher interest rates. So, the more funding we can get through grants, the less we have to finance, the lower the rates will be for the customer. And it also lowers bulk data costs. By providing multiple outside connections to the state of Vermont, we can now work with different competitive carriers. And the whole idea here is to make our bulk data as competitive as it is in New York and Boston, because what we're trying to do in Vermont, when we talk about growing our rural towns, our rural communities, it's about bringing in really the new age of business, which is high intellectual margin business. So this is about strengthening the core of our rural communities. Now, talk about resiliency and redundancy of the networks. We talk about the other benefits include, reduced transportation. For example, the Northeast Kingdom, if you look at energy burden, people do a lot of driving in the Northeast Kingdom. So the more we can reduce that through things like telehealth and teleeducation, we benefit the climate. We also give, when I talk about equal opportunity, we give rural community members the equal opportunity to partake in energy and climate programs, such as competitive energy rates, as well as other energy programs. And also, I will tell you that even today, as you all know, everything is done on the internet, and if you're on the wrong side of the digital divide, you're not competing in the same arena that people are in more urban areas. And we've developed this network in conjunction with all of the CUDs, the electric utilities, as well as the major telecommunication carriers. And it benefits all providers. We are going to use existing fiber where it makes sense today. The last thing we want to do is use taxpayer money to be overbuilding fiber that's owned by private carriers. We'll do that through what's called indefeasible rights of use, which is a financial tool that makes it part of your assets. And we'll do that through a special purpose vehicle, which allows multiple owners, and keeps it in community control. So it's a benefit to all providers. Next slide, please. So the middle mile application, it's a $114 million federal grant. It's part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act broadband programs, which is called the BEAD, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. There's $62.5 billion nationwide available to that program. $42.5 billion is made available for infrastructure build. The rest is for equity and affordability. We're looking at, as part of this program, a $30 million cash match, plus a $16 million in-kind match that comes from the private telecom carriers as well as some of the CUDs. We're looking at a network that's 1,663 miles total, 1,107 new miles. So we'll use 500 miles of existing fiber. And I'll point out that this network's going to get built whether the grant is received or not, because this is what a good, functional, resilient, and redundant network should look like. This is called following good design practices. So if we don't get the money, it comes out of consumer rates. Next slide, please. So what? Do I hear someone trying to jump in here? Okay. Rob, we got a little funny box showing up here on the screen, but there we go. So what do we mean by leveraging other grant programs? There are other programs such as the USDA RayConnect program and USDA programs. We're going to, if we don't get this middle mile grant, we're going to leverage other programs as well. Grant funding provides more initial funding. We get the lower borrowing costs, and since they're nonprofit utilities, the capital savings are passed directly to the Vermonters. So at this point, hopefully I've presented plenty of time for questions. I guess we could take the presentation down, Robin. Yep.
Okay. Edie, go ahead.
Hi, so thank you. I think we all understand the importance of getting broadband statewide. I think that's pretty vital to just about everything that we want to do statewide. My question is about, are we creating networks that are going to be privately owned? Or is this, you mentioned something about that, and I was just curious if that's setting up monopolies in the system, and that's ultimately going to not be as beneficial as it would be for our citizens if they weren't.
Thank you. I'm glad you asked that question, because I want to make it clear that that's why we're using this thing. If you're curious, you can Google what's called a special purpose vehicle. It's a financial tool that allows multiple parties to be part of an organization. So we have experience of this special purpose vehicle in Vermont. The Highgate substation follows that same principle, which is owned by all of the multiple electric utilities in the state of Vermont, both private and public. The majority of the special purpose vehicle will be held by the CUDs. So the CUDs will have control over that network. That network will be owned by that special purpose vehicle. So it will always be in control of the communities through that special purpose vehicle. Does that answer your question?
I think so. And then, so some of the network currently is privately owned, correct? Right? I mean, some of the network has been developed privately.
Yes. Yeah.
So are we?
Yeah. And so that's, so the way we're going to manage that, I'm glad you brought that up too, because I want to explain what's another financial tool called indefeasible right of use. An indefeasible right of use means that, essentially, if there is private fiber being held right now, it will be turned over to the special purpose vehicle through that financial tool called an indefeasible right of use. That indefeasible right of use does not expire. It actually becomes part of the assets of the special purpose vehicle. So yes, we are going to try to use private fiber where it exists, but it will be turned over to the special purpose vehicle and become part of that community-owned network. Does that answer that question?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Christine, I've been a rep from my town to the EC Fiber Board for the last 3 years, and it seems like within the last year, I fully support broadband, but it seems like the problem, at least for EC Fiber, has not necessarily been money, but it's been workforce, and in the contractors, some subcontractors, and levels of all the subcontractors has not been available to actually do the work. So I'm curious if this money is approved, are there also efforts to be able to work on the workforce availability in order for you to actually spend the money by the CDs?
Yeah, thank you. Another important question. The first thing you do when you look at a project is you identify key constraints. So early on last year, the board, we identified two major key constraints, one being materials and one being workforce. Now, materials, I should never say it this way, but I'm going to say it anyway. That was a relatively straightforward problem to solve because, we had materials that took a year to, had what called 1 year lead times. We just purchased a whole bunch of it ahead of time, a year's worth of material ahead of time. So that didn't get in our way. By the way, on a $7 million deal, we saved $2 million, or $9 million, we saved $2 million. We only paid $7 million. So we saved money doing that as well. The more challenging part was the workforce development. So we put together a workforce development team. We've been working with the Vermont State College System, the Department of Labor, ACCD, as well as private construction companies to address this issue. And we put together a pay it forward certification program. And of course so we've been developing the program, which is a kind of a boots on the ground operation where we put people up on poles and train them. And we're offering that first training in April. We're beta testing it through the CTEs, doing it during April spring break, providing training to the technical schools, and then providing regular training all moving forward. So we need a minimum of 200 additional technicians. That means you have to train 600 because you train 3 to get 1. People find out they can't work in the air, which is why we're doing this in pole yards. So we're doing a pay it forward program, which means we're going to pay people to get trained. And as soon as they're done with their training, they go right into a paid job. We've been working with the private construction companies, and we have agreement because they helped us develop this curriculum that if we do this, they'll take them and put them right to work. And so we have a very robust workforce development program that 7 of the CUDs have been helped to develop. Plus, we selected 3 major telecommunication construction companies to help us develop this curriculum. Pat Moulton and Darlene Jones from VTC have been really the leaders in development of the curriculum. So yes, we took that very seriously, and we think we've got a very good program in place to help benefit Vermonters. And the idea being here, of course, is to try to raise the boats for Vermonters. You take a person from a low-income job who might be trying to raise a family. They can't necessarily afford to leave their job, which is why we're going to pay them to get trained and get them right into the workforce. So you could take people that are working, a minimum wage, well, not minimum wage jobs, but $15, $18 an hour jobs. I say not minimum wage because I don't think we've got many of those in Vermont, but if we do, we want to put them through the program and get them into these $30 an hour plus jobs. Once they're in the job, agreements with the employers is to over time pay the cost of that training back, and that'll be used to train future potential employees.
Great, thank you.
Well, it sounds like this is sort of an apprenticeship program that's being developed, and is it for just putting, not just laying fiber, but splicers as well? I think I've heard we need a number of splicers to come in. It's a specialized field for putting fiber optics in.
Yeah, there's when I say those 200, 2/3 of those technicians will be outside technicians, and 1/3 will be inside technicians. So 133 technicians will be outside working on the poles, but then you need the other 66 working to do the final connections of the home and turning up the modems kind of thing. Now, I'm glad you brought that up because we also are working to develop career paths for folks. So once they can start as a outside or inside fiber technician, then we're working with the next step, and we're in the middle of that right now with our workforce plan. And of course, I can make that available to anybody. We're on step 2 of the workforce plan, which is now to develop those career. Rob shared it in your chat, the workforce plan. But we're now at phase 2 of that, which is to work to, first of all, develop to get. This is an apprentice program, and it'll be an accredited apprentice program. But we're also going to get college credits So if you want to go on to become an electrical or mechanical engineer, there's a path for you there. If you want to go work into IT, we've already reached out. I reached out several months ago to VEIC to say if people go from here, can they go there to do things like smart grid and other programs. So the whole idea here is to make this a career development program, not just a training program.
Excellent. June?
Thank you so much. Just very briefly, Christine will never say this about herself, but the committee should know that the work that she has been doing in this area is groundbreaking in the country. It was first out of the gate. This was directly a result of the prescience that our legislature had in getting out ahead of the curve, even when CRF money was being deployed to do planning as to how we were going to get this job done. So what you're hearing here today is what other states in the nation wish their executive branch was telling them about the state of workforce development and the innovative strategies that have been used to get us in a place where we could deal with these problems. I have no doubt that that is directly the result of Christine's considerable experience as a utility executive. She could see from very far away that these were going to be issues and took them in hand. I just wanted to underscore that because she's never going to say that about herself.
Thank you so much, June.
Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate that as well. I think this is a really emerging craft. I think we're in the ground level, which we could have started attracting more students into Vermont that could jump into more into our companies that are here and something that they can take back home if they need to or stay here in Vermont. So
that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. And that's why this $30 million appropriation is so important too, because the idea that you're going to cover a state with a functional middle mile backbone is truly exceptional in the country. And it not only helps demonstrate for the other states that are plagued by rural dynamics that it can be done, but for Vermont, the multiplier effect of having that kind of strength of connectivity is unfathomable, whether it's education or telemedicine, economic development, all of the things we care about so much in the state, to include facilitating low-income access and more affordable access. So my point is that compared to other states, this state has been way ahead of the curve in its thinking and its vision, and the FCC is cognizant of that, which is why they surprised Christine with that feedback that this middle mile project was very interesting to them. And we stand an excellent chance of getting that funding if we can show we have the available state match. And that's what the 30 million's for. We also have some language, I think, at the bottom of the slide, Christine, highlighting a change. And I'm not sure whether we've discussed that or not with the committee, but perhaps we should. But with that said, if we can pull this off, we're pulling off something that's a big deal for the state and for the country. So I really urge the committee to support it.
Yeah, Rob, if you want to pull that slide up, I'll point it out. That basically reaffirms what I talked about. If the grant is not awarded, the funds will be used to leverage other federal dollars and programs, is what that bottom of that slide says. So, the point is what we've said is, we're going to use this funds. It's not just like the state's kind of putting an additional $30 million on the thing. That the state is putting down. It's really a down payment on more money coming in. Rob, I think you're at slide 7.
Yeah, we meant the there we go, the legislative language. That's right. Yeah. And the other thing to highlight with that too is that the FCC is watching and wants. There's a big philosophical debate in the country, and I think one of the members pointed to this a moment ago about the private nature of this infrastructure or the public potential for this infrastructure. And Vermont is really pointing the way toward how to do this and how to fix a terrible wrong that was done when Congress decided to deregulate telecommunications and commit it to the private sector. We're now trying as a country to engineer our way out of that because the privatization of this infrastructure led to these stranded places, as we all know. And Vermont has really been visionary in saying, oh, yes, there is a role for public ownership, public administration of assets of this nature, because we all know now broadband is, in fact, a public necessity, whether the FCC and Congress will define it that way or not. So it's critical that Vermont continue to support this policy direction that we've been taking, and that this legislature's been so instrumental in pulling together. What is particularly noteworthy for you folks is the parenthetical listing First Light, EC Fiber, and NEK Broadband, because it's that kind of cooperation and cohesion between CUDs and private sector owners that we were really hoping for in putting together this model of getting connectivity deployed in the state. This is why the VCBB was created, and this is the hoped for kind of outcome. So your support's really critical at this juncture.
Yeah, let me piggyback on that too, because I will tell you, in my previous role as the CEO of the Vermont Electric Cooperative, we recognized, and I think the federal government has been a little slow to recognize this as well. We recognize telecommunications is even more critical than electricity. This is a shift that's happened over the years because of so much automation that's happened with our utility systems control and data acquisition systems. This came revealed to me when there was this bomb cyclone coming up the coast, and we had a meeting with the federal government, and they said, be prepared for a telecommunications outage. And I looked around at my team, and our faces all turned white because we've over the years through the smart grid, we were able to cut outage times by 2/3. And we didn't want to go back to that old days. Now we went out and purchased three satellite phones. But can you imagine trying to restore power the old way, with using satellite phones and having to tell people where to go? I think the federal government is really behind the times in terms of recognizing the importance of a robust and resilient middle mile infrastructure.
Well, it looks to me as the best case scenario with the 16 million in kind that it's about a 3-to-1 match, maybe a little bit over. And worst case scenario, it's a little better than a 2-to-1 match.
Right.
Which makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, anytime we can use our dollars to match state dollars, and if we're getting 2-to-1 or 3-to-1, we're much better off. We've already heard how important fiber is, and as far as providing educational opportunities, we've already heard the dollars that we put in to VSAC last year to help nurses get better educated and get more students into the pipeline is already working. And it's because of that fiber network that's starting to roll out there that people can now get educated via the internet instead of having to be in person all the time. So the more we can do with that, the better off I think the whole state is in workforce education. Jim?
I'm sorry. I heard my name. Please, back to you.
This is a question for either one of you. I'm curious about, where are the programs, the training programs going to be administered from? Are they going to be mostly our tech centers?
The training programs, yes, we're targeting tech centers. That's what we're in the process of right now. But at the same time, we're also targeting making it open available to people who want to better their job opportunities throughout life, better their career opportunities. So it's not just limited to CTEs. It also includes people, Vermonters in general.
So would CCV be included in offering the training?
Well, we'll make it available to CCB and make it available to the Vermont Tech System. The training has to be done at pole yards, so it's not classroom training, it's field training.
Is that flowing through VTC and through the tech centers for adult tech ed, or are the career centers also beginning to train up high school students?
It's both, yes. The first beta training in April is targeted at high school students. The whole idea is to, work out the bugs with the high school students, then offer it to the adults.
Excellent. Thank you. June, did you have another comment?
I did, but I want to make sure we've tied off this topic because it goes back to something you were saying a moment ago, and Chair Marcotte.
Yep, I think we're.
All right. I don't want to miss the opportunity to raise awareness about another imperative that we're addressing with this work, and that is decarbonization. It doesn't get a lot of traction, and it doesn't get the discussion that is warranted. But when it comes to cutting emissions, you understand almost immediately the role that telecommunications plays in facilitating things like the nursing education without necessitating people getting on the road and driving places. And these are thoughts that we need to increasingly incorporate into our thinking when we weigh these investments, because the way that we are going to decarbonize the way we live is going to be, well, everything on the menu, basically, if you ask me. And there's a huge role to be played then by a robust telecommunications network that can allow people to do so many things without hitting the road. I just want to underscore that because you don't hear it a lot, but I've decided that it's not because it's not relevant. You don't hear it a lot because it's so obvious that people just don't talk about it. And yet, it's a fact that when we all entered the lockdown globally in 2020, there was a massive drop in carbon emissions in the world, measurable because of that. And so it just underscores the point that it's another win for making this investment. And I'm sorry to go on about this, but I am very passionate about it.
Okay.
Yeah, and as Commissioner Kearney knows, I'm very passionate about this as well. And this is about energy equity as well. And in the future, if anybody wants to have a beer and spend hours talking about this, I love talking about it. Fiber to the home will be critical in terms of increasing the ability for our grid to handle renewables. Through you think about one of these tractor trailer trucks that draws a megawatt. That's 1,000 homes plugging into the grid in one point. So we definitely need smart grid for that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think it's a point well taken, and sometimes you have to continue to state the obvious in order for everybody to understand the obvious. I think it's a good idea to just keep pointing that out so everybody understands just what, getting good broadband access out there means. And that is certainly part of the equation of the reasons why we should be doing it.
It is, when I first started doing this work in this capacity 6 years ago, not too long thereafter, the Federal Department of Energy and the Federal Transportation Administration both put out, no, it was the National Governors Association, I think, put out these massive studies in the transportation sector and in the renewable energy sector. And they had these lovely covers that illustrated the studies and showed all the applications for good stuff that comes from renewable energy and good stuff that comes from electrifying transportation. And both reports had meaty sections about one little icon that appeared on both title pages of the reports, and the icon was the Wi-Fi icon. And that's where this first started coming home to me, that neither decarbonization in the transportation sector nor the deployment of renewable energy will come to full fruition unless you've got that ability to make those Wi-Fi connections. It's also true in agriculture, and Christine's got a great example of that, where the benefit of being able to just test the humidity of soil on site because you have an internet connection, as opposed to driving 100 miles round trip to get to a lab to see what that water content is. It's obvious what the savings are economically, and with that, the opportunity cost that is paid if you don't have that connectivity, and we just can't afford that anymore. So this is a bad habit of mine. This is your agenda and your microphone, Chair Marcotte. So I'll be quiet.
Commissioner, thank you. And Christine, thank you as well. We appreciate the time and the explanation. And we'll remember everything that we've discussed as we put our letter together to give to appropriations with our recommendations on 30 million.
Thank you. And please be in touch with either one of us if you have any follow-on questions.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your time.
Well, we appreciate what you're doing as well. So.
Oh, and can Rob send what he put in the chat? I was reminded by Andrew that things that are in the chat are not public record, and we need to make sure that gets put in the public record. So he'll post that to our webpage as well.
Yep, happy to.
Great. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Thank you.
Too. Commissioner.
Hello.
How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good.
Is Matt, you gonna sit with me?
There's another chair there if you'd like to sit up with it. It's fine.
Jared,
I can always slide back here too.
Yeah.
Don't look at this up.
It's nice and
So, thank you.
toasty.
Exactly.
We're going to kind of switch on the budget adjustment now to look at section 16, subsection 2, which is the
Brownfield.
sections.
Perfect. Thank you. For the record, Joan Goldstein, Commissioner, Department of Economic Development.
And Matt Chapman, I'm the Director of the Waste Management and Prevention Division at the Agency of Natural Resources.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So before we get right into BAA, would it help the committee to talk a little bit about brownfields, a little bit about let's rewind and just talk about what this is and why we're here together? And
That's a great idea.
Okay.
I think it'd be good for our new members. Some of
Excellent.
them know well what brownfields are and others may not.
So maybe we'll start with you on that.
Well, sure.
Because there's hundreds of property. I always say there's hundreds of properties around the state that are contaminated.
And there are. So the state numerous years ago developed a brownfields program. So my agency, the Agency of Natural Resources, basically ensures the cleanup of contaminated properties from whether it be petroleum or other hazardous substances. And the brownfields program is sort of the voluntary approach that we've created for people to come in and get technical assistance from the Agency of Natural Resources and financial assistance from the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. It's a collaborative approach that we have, and I think it's important to also mention that the sort of third leg of the stool is the regional planning commissions and the vital support that they give in sort of finding community-based projects and help getting them into the system and making sure that the system works. So the process is basically we take blighted or contaminated properties in communities, clean them up, and then redevelop them into housing, a redevelopment, or vital community green space in a town to help basically with their planning objective.
Whatever the developer wants to do.
Exactly.
The program at the Agency of Natural Resources is called BRELA. Yes. It's a cute acronym. It's basically Brownfields Limited Liability Program. Did I have that right? Okay. So think about it. We have all these we call it dirty dirt or contaminated property, and some ambitious developer decides they want to buy that property and do something with it. And the town is usually very supportive of that because right now the land or that building could be pretty much valueless, right? So the beauty of BRELA is that you're the innocent purchaser. You did not cause the contamination. You apply to A&R for that protection, and then A&R will do, the RPCs and others do assessments. What is in the dirt? What is the hazardous substance? And then they go through a process to come up with a corrective action plan on how to clean it up, based on the redevelopment plan that they have in mind, right? Because every corrective action plan could be tailored to what they're going to do. For example, they might want to do a parking lot, so maybe the cleanup isn't going to be as expensive. There's not going to be humans living on top of that property or people working there every single day. So what we decided after years and years, right, there used to be, well, there is a brownfields enabling statute that had a limit on how much we could spend on cleanup. That was $250,000. Do I have that right? Or is it 200? 200 or 250?
Yeah.
And what we had is you had like projects languishing in places like Springfield, St. Albans, Burlington, that would cost millions of dollars to clean up. So you either had situations where the developer's like, okay, I can't fill that gap. This is not going to make economic sense. Go to EPA. It's not a big enough project to be a Superfund site. And if you apply for cleanup, you could get up to, now you can get up to 500,000. Still, it would take years and years and years. So 2 years ago, during the 21 session, there was general fund, excess, and we thought, what are some good ideas for redevelopment? Let's ask for cleanup funds from the state that would be a lot more flexible than what we have to do through EPA. And everybody loved it. We were really surprised by the, kind of both chambers of this house were very much in support. And in total, we got $25 million, $14 million for A&R, and $11 million for the Agency of Commerce. And maybe you want to talk about the BERA program?
Sure. Well, in addition to the money that went to the Agency of Commerce, there's also a targeted program for let's call them incredibly hard to clean up sites. The Pine Street Barge Canal and the redevelopment that's proposed there. The Jones and Lamson site in Springfield are two examples of these incredibly sort of complicated, and they needed sort of both multi-agency assistance from a technical perspective to basically deal with the challenges they had from a regulatory perspective, but also enhanced funding to help them get over the top. So it's the BERA program, and it's led by A&R, but again, it's actually a multi-agency approach, because like for Pine Street, there are agency of transportation issues and commerce issues. So we all work together to try and unblock the roadblocks to move those projects forward. And there was $14 million dedicated overall to the, do you remember, 7 projects, I believe that were. 7.
So what we did during that time, in that language, we said, great, you guys approved $25 million. The $11 million that the agency got, $1 million was to be subgranted to the RPCs to do, to contract out the assessment work. And we also put in these notwithstanding language, which allowed us to go over the limit that's in the enabling brownfield statute, because we knew the whole raison d'etre of getting this money was to be more flexible and to clean up these sites that were languishing that $250,000 just was not going to do. So that's the reason why we had it. Last year we went out, it was such a popular program. Last year we asked for more money and we were appropriated $6 million. What we neglected to do in that $6 million appropriation was to include that notwithstanding language. So we've now been limited by this $250,000 cap and limited to a $50,000 cap on assessment. And there was also no mention of a sub-grant to the RPCs. So in budget adjustment, we have $1 million to the RPCs. In the original appropriation back 2 years ago, they were assessed, they were able to collect a 10% admin fee. This time we put it in for 5%, thinking that 10% was rather rich for an admin fee. And that's what we're here to discuss. It's the $1 million sub-grant, and to include the notwithstanding language so we can continue to fund these projects that are going to be over the $250,000 limit that's in the brownfield statute. I think I'll stop there, unless, did I include everything?
I think you included everything, I think.
Okay, so we're saying that it won't be limited to $200,000 grants, right, per parcel?
Correct.
That there's no cap to it?
It's a notwithstanding, we include the notwithstanding language so that we can go over that $250,000 cap. Now, I understand since this time, EPA has increased, thank you. Increased their cap to $500,000. And that's great. And, maybe there's an argument to be made that the state should do the same. But I think for this specific purpose, the general fund money for brownfields is really meant to be more flexible than even the EPA. Because if we have the same limit as the EPA, I would argue, why have the separate GF fund, for it? So the flexibility has been incredibly powerful.
And I guess the only other thing I would note, and I apologize, is that this money has made an incredible difference to the program. We've seen basically a doubling of the number of applicants coming into the program since the state has put these sort of increased incentives and state money out there. So it's really drawn sort of cleanup interest and redeveloper interest in the brownfields program by doing this.
So of the 6 million that's there now, you may have said this, I missed, but what's remaining now of the 6 million?
Yeah, I'm looking for that. I think 4 applications have been approved. So it's a very small amount because we're just finishing up on the original 10 million.
Yeah.
But there are 4 applications pending. So we do think that by the end of this fiscal year, the rest of that will be allocated on the 6 million from last year.
Okay, but now if we take the cap off, that'll take care of those 4 that are in the queue?
Yes, because for those 4, I did have people check this morning to see if those were over 500,000, and they were like, yeah, and they're definitely over 200,000, but 4 of them were like in the 700,000 range.
And that'll, at what place will it put those projects? Will it complete those projects?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm just trying to think about the match requirement. I think that it doesn't complete it. In other words, it's not redeveloped, but it'll pay for the remediation. It'll pay for the cleanup. So then it'll be ready to be redeveloped. So it's really like the first step in getting this ready for some sort of build out or outdoor rec, or, our preferences and our priority is housing or economic development, including outdoor rec or any type of sort of green or shared community space.
And these projects are you able to tell us where they are?
All over in 8 different counties, I believe, so far. A large amount in Springfield because there's just so much in Springfield. Some in Winooski, Burlington City Arts, and middle of the state, some in White River Junction, and what else? Housing, yeah, all across Windham County. Windham and Windsor Housing Trust was another applicant. So it's been pretty good, pretty well distributed. And as Matt said, it's encouraging more people to take these on because normally they're like, nobody really wants to love a brownfield, but this program is incredibly popular now. And there is a whole spectrum. Like you have to go for the assessment first. Well, actually you go for BRELA first. Right. You get the assessment, find out what's in the ground or in the air, do your redevelopment plan, figure out what kind of, mitigation measures you have to put in place. How much is that going to cost? Mm-hmm. And with the state money, it's really been able to make that happen.
Well, and I think for us, get to 1 second, but I want to finish. I guess the question for us is notwithstanding the limitations on the fund, are we in a better place so that we're not, putting a lot of money into a lot of places? Are we getting a better bang for our buck by putting more dollars into a smaller area for remediation? Does that get us to the place where those properties can get redeveloped in a much quicker time frame than by expending the dollars in a smaller
in smaller buckets? Yeah, I understand. Like we did a sort of an averaging of the first round, and it was like the average project cost was $623,000 based on corrective action plan estimates. That's just average. So it's not median or anything, it's just average. And some of the costs were like $1.5 million, 1.2, 1.2. Two of them in Springfield amounted to 2.4 million. And I understand that Jones and Lamson is still not complete.
Yes.
We'll need more money for that. So, yeah, I mean, it's a journey. It's a journey. These take a long time, and it depends on what's in the ground, though. You know, petroleum seems to be easier. PCB, not so much. You know, much more expensive. And again, depending on what they want to do with it. So, yeah, I mean, I would say that if you don't want the notwithstanding language, you would really question, why are we going to have this program if it's just going to be the same limit? And then it would be this painstaking process of having to go and apply.
Now, do we notwithstand the 10 million?
Yes, you did. So then the original, we had that. It was just the second year. Again, we missed it. And that's why we've been using that 6 million for smaller projects, because we could only do the smaller ones. So.
John?
10% is the standard de minimis for federal dollars for an indirect or admin rate. And so 5% seems rather lean to my mind, especially for the regional planning commissions, which many have attested are under-resourced and understaffed. I'm wondering why you settled on 5%.
So 5% is sort of like a de minimis for state admin fees, like around the state. If there isn't an express statement of what we could collect for admin, it's 5% is the maximum. So that we based it on that. It was sort of like a rule of thumb. We were like, wow, that's a lot. We know that probably individually they're understaffed, but just in total, the RPCs probably have more population than the entire Agency of Commerce, just to give a frame of reference in terms of amount of people. So yeah, we thought, we were also thinking, wow, if it can't be done for less than 10%, maybe we should have a more competitive bid process in order to get this work done, because if that felt rich.
Have the regional, if I may, have the regional planning commissions expressed a desire for a higher admin or indirect rate?
Yes, always. Yep.
Jim? Can you explain that phrase, notwithstanding, why the?
Yeah, so are you the lawyer?
Yeah, no, I'm happy. I used to play a lawyer at work. Sure. So basically what it is it says, even though the legislature has established a set of statutory caps, we're going to allow the Agency of Commerce to not abide by those caps in the administration of this grant program. And I guess I would sort of add on top, I mean, like these caps have been there for a long time. And as I'm sure all of you know, the cost of consulting work, redevelopment work, it has, and especially frankly, even in the past several years, has grown significantly.
Yeah.
So some of these numbers look big, but unfortunately, in the world of construction costs and cleanup costs, they are starting to become more normal.
Heather and then.
Oh, I was just going to say that the regional planning commission, being near Springfield and understanding how much that takes, that part of this concerns me a little bit, because I know the administration of those projects, there's a lot of work to that.
Mm-hmm.
That's me building off a theme. I feel like I'm having a Charlie Kimball moment. So that's my question before, but just to build off of it, because just to your last point around like the cost of everything is going up. So I don't want to hamstring our ability to get bids to actually do work on these brownfields by that 5% administrative fee. And I'm sure we're going to be having that conversation with all the other, money pieces that we talk about in committee around what is the amount of money needed in this particular economy that we're facing to make sure we get good qualified bidders to do the work that we're trying to fund here. So I guess it's more of a comment since it's been asked and you've answered it already, but I do think that 5% might hamstring us in this economy with getting the bidders that we need on these projects.
Joan, I was wondering about this administration of this program by the regional planning commissions. Was this done before? Was this new that they would be administering these programs?
So,
a continuation of how it was done.
So before 21, we had never subgranted them money. Maybe you all had. This was new. Like having general fund money for brownfields was new for the Agency of Commerce, at least at this level. There might have been some smaller amounts, or the agency used to go out for EPA grants. So this idea of the sub-grant to the RPCs was new. But what was also new was, wow, 10%, like, because the agency is used, well, we don't get any admin fee, but like, we're used to more of like a 5% maximum. The other thing is that they are putting it out for bid. So, I mean, that's the work that's involved, is putting it out for bid, because then somebody else does the assessment. And there isn't as much onerous reporting requirements as there are on the federal side, as an example, but, you know, yeah, I don't.
I think, you know, a lot of the discussions we had last year, not just on this, but in general, with agencies doing more work, that we have started to up the percentage of the admin fees for state government. You know, I think 8% we gave to DFR to implement, you know, a COVID response. So I think.
Why was that done, Mike? Why was that done?
Just because of the fact that it's expensive to do and expensive to administer. So I think there's a realization within the legislature that, you know, 5% probably isn't cutting it anymore. Not for state government, not for anybody. So, Edie?
So I just want some clarification, because I heard you talk about the federal program, but this is a state program. Are we, often what we're talking about is leveraging federal money, and how do we leverage federal money? But it sounds like we're not even applying for federal money because it's too onerous. And I'm just trying to understand, am I hearing that accurately, or is that?
No, so we still have some federal money in our I'll call it the normal EPA fund, right? But for example, site-specific EPA money has a limit. Like now the limit's 500,000. So for these projects that are requiring millions of dollars, it just, again, the opportunity was, we have general fund, let's utilize it. It's much more flexible. We don't have to wait years and years to clean up these properties. So it's not that.
Are we accessing the first 500,000 from federal and then paying?
Not necessarily, because it would take even more time to do both of those tracks. They don't come out all the time. There's a period of time when it comes out. I don't know. Tell me when it is.
I believe there's a couple windows. I mean, I think
there's some windows and you know, for example, some of the RPCs do apply. They have some assessment money. I think 3 of them got assessment money last year. Different ones apply and they don't get it. It's no guarantee. So you could apply, but it's competitive nationally. I'm not saying we're leaving it die. It's just that this opportunity came up for general fund where there was more flexibility. Right.
So, I mean, just to add on top of that, I think the RPCs have always gone for federal assessment money. So there's always been a coalition of RPCs who have gone and done that. A large portion of the EPA, like the cleanup money, is project driven, right? So it's less of an opportunity for
a bucket,
right? It's less of us. It's if a project wanted to go out and go for those funds, they could. They are, as Commissioner Goldstein said, they're nationally competitive, so that creates challenges too for the types of projects we often do in Vermont.
Yeah.
And so this is taking it just a little bit of a different direction, but do the RPCs roll up to your department?
No.
And is there any oversight of the RPCs?
It's a good question. I think there are contracts through DHCD for their town planning work, and other agencies have, I don't know if it's subcontract, but I know there are relationships. They do a fair amount of work all over state government. But they are separate, they're like separate independent, they're really like a municipality or governmental, quasi-governmental agency.
Right. DHCD.
Sorry, Department of Housing and Community Development, our sort of sister department, brother department within the Agency of Commerce, so. But no, they don't report up to us. I mean, I have to say that when we made decisions on the different grants that we were giving out, it was A&R, DED, an RPC, and a RDC. So there was coordination and kind of collaboration about which projects should get funded. But no, there isn't really a reporting relationship necessarily.
Through this, this million that would go to the RPCs, there's performance measures that you that they have to meet? How does the contracting work with?
Yeah, I mean, so it's not a contract. To be clear, the first 2 years ago, it was expressly stated in the bill, I guess, in the big budget bill, is where it was, right? It basically gave us the direction to give a sub-grant, to grant $1 million to the RPCs. And then they divided it up equally across all the RPCs, collected their admin fees. So it's not a contract. I mean, that's the thing that's in question. It isn't really a competitive bid. It's just, it was
So it's
expressly stated.
it's not quite a direct appropriation.
No, not quite, but
Flows through you and then to them.
right.
Correct.
And so they will report back on how much they have left and which projects it went to. I'm trying to remember other things that they report on. But, you know, the problem, you know, we're always in this mindset of continuous improvement. Like, yes, it's always, they want to do it the same way. But like, for example, we visited somebody in Rutland over the summer. They needed more assessment money, but Rutland RPC was out of money. They had to go around and figure out who they could borrow from other RPCs. So we're always questioning models and figuring out, well, is this the right way to do this? I know DEC's got retainer contractors, so you don't have to go out to bid all the time. So it's less admin work. Like, is that another model? But they didn't really want to hear it. I mean, basically, while we were figuring out different paths, I was getting emails from every legislator about, you know, what's wrong with you? How come you're not writing this $1 million check? So we figured we'd put it in BAA, but we thought it could be done in a less expensive way.
Okay, so is there information out there of what they spent it on, how, you know, the projects, you know, what they did, the admin that was spent? Do you get a report back on that we can look at, or do we need to have some type of language in there that would require them to report back to you or to us?
Yeah, I mean, they report back like how much has been utilized, but I don't think that's the issue necessarily. It's just that, yeah, like we're gonna spend $100,000 of the $1 million just on distributing that money. And so it just leads to question, like, shouldn't we use that for assessment money? You know, the work is they have to do an RFP. They have to get contractors to do the assessment. They're not doing the assessment. So that's work, you know, doing the RFP, figuring out which contractor is available, assigning them to the task, right?
We have 10 RPCs.
11. Yeah.
So if they split it up equally, getting a little less than 100,000, they get 10% of that.
And I don't want to jump the gun, but I will probably be back here. Maybe Commissioner Goldstein will as well. We asked for, in the big bill, we asked for 2.5 million in additional assessment money to come through A&R. And again, I think, you know, the assessment funds are one of the things we've been very focused on cleanup. But the assessment is sort of the first step, and we want to make sure that we have a number of projects sort of ready to go and sites ready to clean up. So,
but that's in the big bill.
That is in the big bill.
And the 2.5 would be all assessment?
It would be all assessment. I think the ultimate approach would be to augment additional funds to the RPCs to again, they, at least, you know, our experience with the RPCs is that they bring, on the assessment side of the work, an incredibly valuable set of skills to the table as far as I mean, they do the contract work. They also do a lot of project development work, right? Like trying to help people. For example, I was just dealing with an RPC this week in a small Northeast Kingdom town that had a blighted property, and they were trying to figure out what the options were for revitalizing that property, right? So there's a lot of handholding with local government to try and help them sort of vision their community.
Okay.
Do we have a list or a graph of properties that have already been through this program that are completed?
We have a list.
Okay.
So, we can print that off if that's helpful for members, if that's something you'd like.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, because I'm just curious in terms of cost averages and whatnot, and which I know it can vary between properties, but just kind of like a ballpark.
So yeah, I mean, so I know we have a list of properties that have been through and completed. I will check in with staff to make on the financial component. Because a lot of times we A&R are involved with the cleanup side, but not the financial, and there's private funding that's coming in that's really pushing these projects forward, so.
Okay, no, that'd be great. I know the data is going to be a little bit different, especially with the inflation and post-pandemic, et cetera, but it would definitely be interesting.
Logan?
I mean, you sort of answered this, but where is the 1 million coming from? It's just from your,
It's from the 6 million appropriation from
from
last
the
year.
6
Yeah, it's from the 6 million.
so the 6 million is for the, I mean, the actual remediation is the amounts you were talking about is higher amounts, 600,000.
Yes, the cleanup.
some odd.
Yep.
The assessments themselves, how much, so this 1 million is going towards assessment projects to be completed by the RPCs.
Right.
What is the average assessment cost?
Yeah, you probably
It's a
better at that.
it's a
but-
range. I mean, it's really hard to give you, you know, it ranges from a fairly small amount to $30,000 to $40,000, depending on the complexity of the area that we're dealing with.
And like the phase, like, so phase 1 is like a desk investigation, like what would the uses of that property? Phase 2 is like, all right, let's dig holes and take samples and test what's in the ground. And so that's a lot more intense and so more expensive. I mean, we heard that phase 1s went up to like at least $5,000.
That sounds right.
But phase 2s could be 60,000 or 70, 80,000, you know, it really depends on the project. So, you know, and some regions have more brownfields than others, right? They're not all have a lot of brownfields, you know. Windsor, Northern Windsor is like.
What would be like the minimum amount for like a general assessment?
Sure, I mean,
You're saying on the high end, it's like 30,000. I'm just thinking in terms of this 5 or 10%, if we're talking about an assessment that only costs $10,000, then you're only talking about giving them $500 to get the assessment started.
So it's not done per, so right, what they want is like $1 million and then they divide it up equally. And then each of them has that pot of money to use for assessments.
Fall into.
And they take off a percentage. I forgot it. They explained it the other day and I'm forgetting how they do it, but they take off a percentage. Each of them could take off a percentage. So they're getting, I guess collectively, they're getting $100,000, but each of them are going to get something much less, right?
Yeah. Yeah, just I mean, I feel like in general, when I've seen RPC budgets, they do try to bill out their time for the different work that they're doing. So like when they're in that brownfields work, they're trying to bill that back to the brownfields, their respective brownfields funds that are then, and so we're talking about trying to keep that below a certain
threshold.
Yeah. Or less money for them to pull out of to continue, you know, doing more assessments. In theory.
Okay, other questions for Commissioner Matt? Okay, all right. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you for.
Thanks.
Gives us a good base.
Let us know any questions.
Yeah, we'll be talking with the RPCs tomorrow. So we appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. So I think it's break time, committee. Come back at 45. We'll hear from Kendall and Chuck again. Continue that conversation, then we'll be speaking with Commissioner Harrington. I sent you an email as well. There's another piece that talked to Commissioner Harrington about as far as the work on the modernization. There's $3 million in BAA that, so I've asked him to speak to that as well. But we're also speaking to him about and to Tori about the refugee workforce piece that's in the budget adjustment, and with Commissioner Hannaford after on, I think it's VHIT. So, you know, I would expect we're probably going to go at least till 4 o'clock, maybe a little after.